Jesus and the Gospels, the podcast series with Father Denis McBride. This episode was recorded in front of a live audience at Hawkstone Hall, the International Pastoral Centre. Episode 6, Leadership in the Gospels, Part 2. Our Identity, Direction and Outlook.
We're exploring at the moment this difference that we mentioned in the last reflection between the religious world that most of us know, where the teachers tend to be male clerics and we have that experience of authority, and the much more radical portrait that we meet inside the gospel world, where you move to an authority of experience of Jesus. And that authority of experience can be exercised by anyone who's actually met Jesus of Nazareth. And in the first example we use, the woman of Samaria, interestingly, it's also ecumenical. Because this woman is not just a woman, she's an outsider. She is a Samaritan. One of my favorites, I must say, is the madman in Mark 5. We would say he was totally off his trolley, the poor man. When you meet him in the gospel, he's running around in his birthday suit, naked. So you have to keep custody of the eyes. And he's running around naked, screaming his head off at the top of his voice and bashing and scoring his body with stones. And of course, nobody wants to listen to him. The community has a community meeting, and they decide that the best thing to do with this man is to tie him down, to keep him down with chains. But he breaks the chains, and he still runs around naked, howling like some mad King Lear who's lost everything that ever gave him dignity. A total madman. And then the evangelist moves his camera onto the hillside, and you see pigs. And these pigs have got the freedom to roam on the hill. They also have their own nurses, notice. They've got swineherds to actually look after them. The pigs have nurses. The madman has chains. If you're sick in this community, clearly you're better off being a pig. Somebody might look after you if you are. And you watch a community that puts its value, its money, into its animals and protects them. But they've got nothing to say. They don't know how to minister to this poor madman. Jesus comes into the scene and he heals this poor man. And interestingly enough, he also sends the piggy bank for a swim. What the community values is dramatically dismissed from this story. So the community focus on the man, on this healed man. And when the community see what Jesus does, they beg him to go away. When Jesus heals people, dear friends, not everyone applauds. The community beg him to leave them alone, and the man begs Jesus to stay with him. And Jesus refuses. Jesus doesn't get too many offers of people who want to stay with him, but he refuses the offer. And instead, he gives this man a pastoral assignment to become an evangelist. He says to him, go back home and tell the people what God has done for you. Now, the man knows this community and they know him. Dear friends, if you knew this man and you were in this community, Would you sit down and take notes from a man? The last time you saw him was a bare bum running up a hill. Would you see him as an evangelist to the community? But he does more than tell his experience. He interprets his experience. What he does is he goes back to the community and he tells the community what Jesus has done for him. This is ministry in the making, dear friends. This is how the story lives, when it's converted from experience into gospel. And one message that flows from this passage is that you should share the reality of the Spirit that you've known. That this man's experience contains an imperative to pass on what has been experienced, to tell others the good news. He becomes an evangelist to his own community. An extraordinary image of a wounded man who now is asked to speak from the authority of his own experience about this man, Jesus. Dear friends, throughout the gospel narrative and in the parables, you're introduced to a litany of vulnerable characters who are offered as our teachers. Remember the woman who anoints the feet of Jesus. At the end of his story, Mark says, Jesus gets up and he says, I tell you solemnly, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, this story will be told in memory of her. Not of him. Why? Because she is the teacher. Remember the time when all the apostles are having a seminar about which of them is the greatest, and none of them can decide who to vote for, so no name emerges. Again, you've got this lust for hierarchy. And Jesus picks up a little child, and he makes the little child the teacher of the apostles. And he says to them, unless you learn to welcome the little people in life, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You've got the man who's desperate because somebody's come to his house at midnight, remember? And he's got nothing to put on the table, and he runs around like an Egypt around the village, waking everybody up, whispering through letterboxes, begging for food, another vulnerable character. You've got the scheming steward, remember that clever guy who makes damn sure he won't end up as a beggar by adjusting the arithmetic of the bills he gives people. Jesus says, you can learn from him. He can be your teacher. The Samaritan leper, the one man who comes back shyly to say thank you to Jesus because he healed him, while the others go off somewhere else. And one of my favorites, the little widow who gets the better of the patriarchal judge. And you watch this tiny wee woman, as we would say, take on the weight of a legal system, the whole weight of it. And you watch this little woman in the parable refusing to play the role everyone wants her to play. She refuses to play the role of the silent widow who suffers loss without protest. This woman refuses to live her life off stage, unseen and unacknowledged. Instead, when she enters the drama, she takes over from the main character. And she stays center stage in this little drama, in this patriarchal drama, until she wins recognition for who she is. And you watch a little woman stay hungry for justice until justice is actually given her. And at the end of the story, you can't help but applaud this wee woman and her spirited performance. And Jesus offers this little woman as a teacher to his own disciples, not to the crowds. And in a sense, her witness of staying hungry for justice is a wonderful witness, I think, in the modern world. Dear friends, we've become accustomed to instant coffee, instant delivery, instant results. Few people today have tolerance for delay or waiting. But the values of Jesus, dear friends, are not instantly attainable. Values like justice and peace take a long time to establish. And the danger in our modern world is that we give up too readily, don't we? One of our problems is that we stop groaning too quickly. We're not desperate enough. Because if we are really desperate, we keep on crying for justice. And the widow teaches us another lesson. You should never be overawed by powerful people. You should never give permission to corruption to rule you. That you should stay with your desperation, because your desperation is your own teacher. And you can hear this little woman shout through the Gospels, stay crying for justice until you exhaust the mighty into justice. Don't give up crying. These are our teachers, dear friends. People who make their sorrow sing. People who make their hurt sing until it becomes good news. To return to this aspect, dear friends, of identity in direction and outlook. Dear friends, these three things ask three questions of us. Who are you? What's your identity? Who are you? Where are you going in your life? We tend not to ask people that. We tend to say, where are you from? Which is a hell of a lot easier question to answer than where are you going? And thirdly, how do you look out at life and how do you look at other people? Those are difficult questions, aren't they, to answer, dear friends? Who are you? Where are you going? How do you look at life? And the answers to those questions, dear friends, are usually developed in the company of other people. Because if you are who you are, you need others, don't you, to confirm you in your identity. You can't get up one morning and say, today I'm Mother General. You're going to need a few people to confirm you in your identity. We don't hold our identities by ourselves. We need other people to say yes to who we are. We need other people to support us too, don't we, in the roads that we take in our life, in the direction that we go. And we need the help of other people too, don't we, to look at life more kindly. Dear friends, everyone, all of us in this room, we all have a collection of personal and social identities. Everyone in this room has this collection of identities as part of who you are. Many of these identities were given to us. We didn't have a choice about which race to belong to, the color of our skin, our nationality, our family. Much of who we are in life, dear friends, is actually what is given to us, isn't it? And part of maturity in life, a lot of the challenge of maturity is to accept who we are. And in a sense, not spend our time in fantasy wishing that we were somebody else. Everyone in this room is either a man or a woman. It's an obvious public identity. But it's an identity too that you can suffer from, isn't it? Many people can suffer simply because they're a woman. There's a level in when you look at these identities, dear friends, they're identities that you can take pride in. They are also identities that you can feel hurt in. Okay? Your sexuality is an obvious part of your identity, whether you're heterosexual or homosexual or bisexual. Your sexuality is a very important characteristic, obviously, of who you are. In some places and some cultures, you're not given permission to be this or that. So some people carry their own sexuality like a secret through life, in the hope that nobody might notice. That doesn't diminish its importance to people. It's an important part of the identity of all of us. Your family. For some people, their family is very important to them. For other people, it's not important. One sister said to me, she said, I left my family because I could only be who I am if I ran away. And she had this, she was from Kenya. She had this wonderful line. She said, some houses are more difficult to break out of than break into. To get away. To be who you are. And you have part of that conflict, don't you, in the story of the gospel, with Jesus and his family, who think that he's out of his mind when they see the busload of rejects that he brings home to afternoon tea. For some people, a very important part of their identity is their tribe, or their clan, or geographically their region. It's kind of interesting. I'm always fascinated every time I go to Ireland. I've never been to a country in the world where people are more fascinated by geography, by where you are from. I remember giving a course of lectures down to the Presentation Brothers down in Cork. There was about 80 people gathered, and this fella came up to introduce two of his friends. He said, now, he's from North Cork. Now, that's okay, but this fella is from West Cork, and you have to be very careful. You know, it's as if I was born with a map of Cork in my head. You know, it's like one sister said, I said, where are you from, sister? She said, Castleblaney. I said, where's that? She said, it's this side of Monaghan. I said, where the hell is Monaghan? You know, for some people, geography is very important. And of course, geography can be a way of diminishing people too, when you do find out where they're from. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? You know, your country and your nationality can be very important to you. Very, very important. As a way of seeing yourself. Your class, for some people that's very important. I was watching a BBC program recently on class, okay? And one lady said at the beginning of the program, she said, I can tell which class people are, by the way they pronounce one word. O-F-F. She said, our class say oaf. And the rest of people say off. She said, people from my class say, be off with you. And for her, her class was very important to her understanding of herself. Who's that woman who writes she died recently, she writes all these romantic novels. She's written about 90. Barbara Cartland was being interviewed on the radio, and I nearly crashed the car. The interviewer said, it was World at One, Miss Cartland, do you think that class is breaking down in Britain today? Oh, she said, yes, otherwise I would not be here talking to someone like you. Which slightly destroyed the point that the interviewer was trying to make. What race you belong to can be very important, particularly when you leave your own people and you go into a place and you realize suddenly you're surrounded by white people. And it's kind of interesting, this one, or your color. Last time I was over in Zimbabwe, we've got wonderful students, 35 students, and I was talking to the lads who had done their novitiate down in South Africa, okay, and they came back, and I said, did you like it? They said, we hated it. And I said, why? They said, for the first time in our life, we became aware of our color. When you live in Harare, in the townships, everybody's black. They said, except the rector, he's white, but he doesn't count. And then suddenly you go into a very multicultural, multiracial situation. And they said we were made aware of our color. It's not just that you have an identity in yourself, dear friends. It can be the way other people perceive it, can't it? Your religion can be a very important part of your identity, or it can't. There was a sister who was very funny. We were talking one day at table about sex education in school, and she said she went to a wonderful convent, 6 years for her education. And she said in those 6 years, she only got 1 or 2 sentences on sex education. The sister said to the class, tonight, girls, you're all going to a disco, dangerous. She said, some naughty boy might turn out the lights and you'll be in the dark. She said, girls, if that happens, stay where you are and shout, I'm a Catholic. She said that was the extent. Of course, in some countries you get killed for this if you belong to the wrong crowd. The Irish writer Bernard McLafferty has written a wonderful little story, very short story. A man after the 10 o'clock news at night, he lives in Northern Ireland, and he goes out and he takes the dog for a walk. He's walking along this country road, and a car draws up and screeches to a halt. A man with a masked face leans out the window with a gun and says, are you a Catholic or a Protestant? He says, I'm an agnostic, but I'm not sure about the dog. And the guy laughs and drives on. And on his way back, he begins to shake, thanking God that he didn't ask the question, what were you before you became an agnostic? Your politics, for some people that's very important. For other people it doesn't even register in the way they see themselves. Your education, what school you went to, you know. Your own vocation, obviously, can operate as a very important part of your identity, or your occupation, if you're a nurse or a teacher or a sound engineer, whatever you are. That can be kind of important in the way that you see yourself. Your own age, that's part of your identity, isn't it? Simone de Beauvoir, the French philosopher, she's dead now, she wrote a wonderful book on old age called The Coming of Age. It's a brilliant piece of writing. And she said that she never thought of herself as an old woman. And she was waiting for a bus in Paris one day. And when she got on the bus, there are 2 seats reserved in the front of the bus, and with little signs on them, give up this seat to an aged or handicapped person. She said when she got on the bus, this young guy got up and offered her a seat. And she says, I looked at the sign. And I turned to the young man and I said, sit down. She said when she went back home that day, she stood herself in front of the mirror. And she said, I had to agree with that young man that I was an old woman. And I never thought of myself in terms of being an old woman. Suddenly she became aware not just of how you see yourself, but how others might obviously perceive you. And of course your own body and your health is part of your identity. Now one of the interesting things to do, dear friends, is to pick 1 or 2 of those as the most important. There's no particular order in these. And one of the interesting things to do is to sit down and say, of all those identities, and you can add some of your own, which for me is the most defining characteristics of how I see myself? In an effort of self-understanding, obviously. I mean, the important identities, dear friends, are going to differ, aren't they, from person to person. Sometimes you drop old identities and you pick up new ones. But for most of us, our key identities are places that give us a good sense of who we are. They're also, dear friends, a place where we can get hurt very badly. Okay? Some of you might know the psychologist Sean Ruth. When he was talking about people's identities, he said this, and I think this is very good. He says, we bring our identities into our relationships, the lot of them. We bring our identities into our leadership. And as part of these identities, we've internalized a variety of painful emotions, rigid ways of thinking about other people. We bring prejudice, we bring guilt, we bring misinformation, hurt, and doubt into our own relationships because of who we are. And he says that can make it very difficult to think clearly about ourselves or about other people. Dear friends, in some places in the world, some people are afraid to claim their identity because if they do, they're going to be victimized as a result. And especially in the West, you get some groups now, don't you, who are tired of being victimized by society. So some of these groups now, it's kind of interesting, have started to claim the right to be who they are. So you've got women's groups on women's rights. You've got gay groups looking for gay rights. You've got minority ethnic groups looking for minority, for their rights. In other words, nowadays it's interesting, often where you get people oppressed, you've got a movement where those people often come together to tell the story of their hurt, in the hope that together somehow they can make a difference and stand up in society and say, look, we are here and we're not going to go away. We're not going to be oppressed any longer. So you get groups literally taking to the streets with banners, saying, we are who we are and we're not going away. Dear friends, if you want to hurt somebody, one of the easiest ways to hurt them is to hurt them in an identity that's important to them. If you find out that someone's nationality or tribe are very important to them, one of the easiest ways to hurt them is to rubbish their nationality or to rubbish their tribe. Or, in other words, find out what's important to people, and then you can hurt them quite easily. Because as we said, these identities that we all have, dear friends, are very important to us because they give us a sense of who we are, but they are also places where we have been hurt and will be hurt. Precisely because they are characteristics of identity. When coming back, you see, when people, dear friends, last year I gave a retreat to the bishops in Ireland, there was 38 of them, and we were doing something on leadership. And I was saying that when you walk up the aisle in your cathedral with your crozier and your mitre, it's not just a bishop that's walking up. Walking up that aisle is the accumulation of all your identities. And that when you speak, you're not just speaking as a bishop. You're speaking out of your own experience. You're speaking out of your own story. So, and in the same way, dear friends, when people come to Jesus, they bring their own identity, don't they? They bring their own direction and their outlook, and they bring all that, dear friends, they bring it into the relationship. They bring their own vulnerability into the relationship. And that's why many of the people who come to Jesus, dear friends, are portrayed as vulnerable. There's an English playwright. Well, I'm not sure if he's actually English, because he studied in Dublin. He might be Irish. He's a man called Aidan Matthews. I went to see his play in London, Exit Entrance. And he gave an interview in the Times. And he was saying to the interview how important his own Catholic faith is in his own identity and in his own thinking. And he says, because I'm a Catholic, I found this interesting. He says, I feel drawn to intermittent people. He says, I feel attracted to people who are weak and bewildered and hurt, like myself, for whom faith provides a shelter. He said, I associate naturally with brokenness. For some reason which is beyond rational inquiry, Our loveliness as human beings, our decency and dignity, are most apparent and beautiful in decayed and disintegrating forms. Faith is not an arena for gladiators. It's a hospital for people who are broken. It's also an occasion of growth and renewal. It's a wonderful image, that. And it's a very gospel image. Because, as I say, when the people come into the presence of Jesus, obviously they're going to bring their own identity and direction and outlook. And there's a sense, and this is, I suppose, what the evangelists are trying to get hold of. The question, in what sense does Jesus of Nazareth influence the way that you see yourself? If at all. Does he? There's a sense of which the evangelists are telling us, look, don't look at your life alone. Don't look at yourself alone. Look at yourself in relationship with him. It's like Simon Peter when Jesus calls him, remember. And Simon Peter speaks out of his own identity and he says, "Oh Lord, leave me alone." Why? Because I'm a sinner. Simon's governing identity in the presence of Jesus is of himself as a sinner. And watch what Jesus does. He doesn't argue that Simon is not a sinner. He offers Simon what? He offers Simon a new identity. He says, "Why don't you follow me? And I will make you into a fisher of people." Catherine of Siena, in one of her letters, it's numbered 226, she wrote, "We cannot see our dignity nor look at our own faults unless we look at ourselves in the sea of God's image in which we are imaged." Catherine's advice is the same. Don't look at yourself alone. Because often when people look at their own identity, all they see is brokenness. You know, some people see themselves simply as God's mobile mistake. One old priest said to me, he said, "I think God made me on the Sabbath when he should have been having a rest." And then halfway through he decided to have a rest. Well, you know that yourself. A lot of people see themselves very negatively. A lot of people, when they look at themselves, they hear old voices from the past. A teacher who said to you, "You'll amount to nothing." "You can't sing." "You're no good at sports." And the funny thing is, dear friends, we treasure these voices like they're gold. The negative ones. And then you hear Jesus come in saying to people, "You are the light of the world. So shine. You are the salt of..." Why does Jesus need to say that to his followers? "You're the salt of the earth, so for God's sake, give taste to life." Waking up to your possibility. Your direction in life. That you don't walk the road that you have chosen in life alone. The evangelists will ask the question through their stories, what influence does Jesus have in the way that you take in life? On the roads that you choose, does he have any part in that conversation? What made you choose the roads you chose anyway? You know that lovely little stanza by the poet Robert Frost? I shall be telling you this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. The road less travelled by. Why did he take it? Why did we choose the roads that we've chosen? Was it something connected with him? And our outlook on life, when we come into any relationship, dear friends, we bring our own prejudices, our own guilt, our own way of seeing people and seeing the world, you know? And of course, Jesus, dear friends, has to handle that, doesn't he, among his own crowd. You know, remember the time when they're going through Samaria, and the people of Samaria reject the group because they're going to a theological mistake. Remember, they're going to Jerusalem. They're not going up to the mountain. What do you do when you're rejected? What do you actually do? And two of the disciples come up with a wonderful pastoral suggestion. Why don't we bring down fire and burn them up? Now that's a hell of an outlook to bring into a relationship. But that's what they're bringing into the relationship. What do you do when people hurt you? You want to hurt back. Often. You want them to feel what you feel, and maybe a wee bit more. And that's their outlook. That's why they've got the nickname, Sons of Thunder. They've got a charism for chaos. And Jesus has to minister to the outlook that they bring into the relationship. So he says, oh, for God's sake, when people reject you, dance. Shake the dust from your feet. And you have to do a kind of jig. He says, and keep going until you meet people who are desperate enough to want you. You know, because people can get stuck in rejection, can't you? You know, sometimes you meet people, dear friends, and they tell you a story that happened 30 years ago. And they will tell you as fresh as if it happened yesterday. And when they're rejected, they build a monument to their rejection and they sit beside it. And they don't go anywhere in life. And Jesus says, that's a sad image, isn't it? Don't let your rejection dictate who you are. Keep moving on. Keep hoping, keep choosing, keep believing. Because he has to do that himself, doesn't he? When he's rejected by the people in Nazareth, he doesn't sit in a heap. He runs. You know, sometimes that's the only thing you can do in your ministry, is to run. So, dear friends, the important thing is when we come into relationship with Jesus, we bring our identity and our direction and our outlook with us. And they're shaped, dear friends, our identity and direction and outlook are shaped by family and culture. They're shaped by our own compulsions too, and our own secret madness. And the question always is, how much influence does Jesus have on who we are and where we're going and our own outlook? And the most obvious example of this in the Gospels, dear friends, isn't it, is discipleship. The men and the women who, when you ask them, who are you? They say, we're disciples of Jesus. Where are you going? Well, we're following him. How do you look out at life? Oh, he's trying to get us to look differently and to move away from thunderstorms. So tomorrow, dear friends, I want to look at this in terms of discipleship, to try to uncover a little of the story of discipleship in the Gospels.
While listening to these recordings, you might want to have the book Jesus and the Gospels beside you. You can order your copy at www.rpbooks.co.uk or find the ebook for your smart device. Thank you for joining Redemptorist Publications on this journey with Jesus and the Gospels.